January 31st, 1943. A dusty, forgotten valley in Tunisia. For the men of the 72nd Anti-Tank Regiment, it was just another cold morning in a long war. The air was thin and sharp, carrying the scent of dust and diesel. They were there to support the 5th Battalion of the East Kent Regiment, holding a line against whatever the Desert Fox, Erwin Rommel, decided to throw at them. Crouched behind their 6-pounder guns, they were confident, perhaps even a little bored. They were veterans, calloused and sunbeaten, men who had chased the Afrika Korps across hundreds of miles of unforgiving desert. They had the best anti-tank gun the British Army could field, a weapon that had proven itself time and again against the familiar silhouettes of the Panzer III and IV. They had faced German panzers before. They knew their enemy, or so they thought, but they had never faced this. Through the shimmering haze of the morning, they saw them. At first, they were just shapes, distorted by the heat rising from the desert floor. They were bigger than anything they had ever seen, moving with a ponderous, unnatural grace. They weren't tanks. They couldn't be. They were too large, too square, like mobile fortifications inching their way across the valley. The order was given, a shout that cut through the nervous quiet. The 6-pounders, the pride of the Royal Artillery, barked in defiance. The shells, white-hot streaks of steel, crossed the distance in the blink of an eye. And then, the impossible happened. They bounced. They simply bounced off the thick hide of these new machines, like pebbles thrown against a fortress wall. A sharp metallic clang echoed back across the valley, a sound of utter impotence. One after another, the shells struck home, only to ricochet off into the desert sky, leaving nothing but a faint, silvery scratch on the dark paintwork. For the British soldiers who witnessed it, it was a moment of pure, undiluted terror. Their best weapon, their shield against the iron fist of the Panzerwaffe, was useless. They were utterly, terrifyingly helpless. This was the day that Tiger came to hunt. What those soldiers experienced in that lonely valley was more than just the shock of a new weapon. It was the brutal, terrifying realization that the very technology they had put their faith in, the steel and fire that was meant to keep them alive, was suddenly, catastrophically obsolete. This is not just the story of a tank. It is the story of an idea. The idea that technological superiority can be shattered in an instant, and the desperate, frantic race against time to reclaim it. It is the story of how a single machine could instill such paralyzing fear that it would be given its own name, Tiger phobia. And it is the story of how that fear would trigger a revolution in Allied engineering, forcing them to confront a terrible truth. To defeat a monster, they would have to create their own. The story of the Tiger begins not on the battlefield, but in the mind of one man, Adolf Hitler. Obsessed with gigantic, wonder weapons, he had long dreamed of a ginormous tank, a Durchbruchwagen, a breakthrough vehicle that could smash through any enemy line with impunity. The project had been in development in various forms since 1937, but the brutal lessons of the Eastern Front in 1941 turned Hitler's dream into an urgent necessity. The appearance of the Soviet T-34 and KV-1 tanks was a profound shock to the German High Command. The Wehrmacht, which had blitzkrieged its way across Europe, suddenly found its tanks outclassed. The sloped armor of the T-34 was deflecting German shells, and its 76mm gun could kill a Panzer IV from a comfortable distance. A solution was needed, and it was needed fast. Two companies, Henschel and Porsche, were tasked with creating this new heavy tank. Ferdinand Porsche, a brilliant but eccentric engineer, developed a radical design with a complex gasoline-electric hybrid drive system. It was innovative, futuristic, but ultimately a logistical nightmare. The Henschel design was more conventional, more robust, and more practical. In trials before Hitler himself, the Porsche prototype, plagued by its overly complex systems, failed. The Henschel design, designated the Panzerkampfwagen 6, was chosen for production. The Tiger was born. It was a beast born of fear and ambition, a 57-ton titan of steel. Its armor was its most defining feature, 100 millimeters of solid, face-hardened steel plate on the front of the hull and 120 millimeters on the gun mantlet. It was deliberately designed without the sophisticated sloped armor of the T-34. The German engineers believed that sheer, uncompromising thickness was the path to invulnerability. And for a time, they were right. But the soul of the Tiger was its weapon, the legendary 88mm KWK-36 gun. Derived from the famed Flak 36 anti-aircraft gun, the 88 was a masterpiece of ordnance. Its long barrel gave it an incredibly high muzzle velocity, which meant its shells flew faster and flatter than any other tank gun of the period. It could kill a Sherman from over a mile away, long before the American tank was even in range to fire back. The Tiger was, in essence, a mobile sniper's nest wrapped in a fortress of steel.
But a weapon like the Tiger was not just a machine. It was a statement. It was a physical manifestation of Nazi ideology. Bigger, stronger, more powerful. The men selected for the new heavy panzer battalions were the cream of the crop, and the tank itself was a propaganda tool, a symbol of German technological supremacy. And in the winter of 1942, as the first Tigers of the 501st Heavy Panzer Battalion were loaded onto ships bound for North Africa, the arid plains of Tunisia would become their proving ground. The Allies knew something was coming. Intelligence reports had been trickling in for months, rumors of a new, heavy German tank. But the reports were vague, contradictory. Some spoke of a 70-ton monster, others of a mere 45-ton vehicle. The truth, when it arrived, would be far more terrifying than they could have imagined. The first British soldiers to face the Tiger were not tankers, but the men of the 72nd Anti-Tank Regiment. These were not raw recruits. They were seasoned veterans of the Desert War, men who had honed their skills against Rommel's finest. Their weapon, the Ordnance quick-firing 6-pounder, was a good gun. It was small, mobile, and its armor-piercing shot could punch cleanly through the frontal armor of a Panzer IV. They had developed a grim confidence in their equipment and their tactics. They knew how to set up an ambush, how to hold their fire for the perfect killing shot. But against the Tiger, their experience, their discipline, their courage meant nothing. In that first, shocking encounter in the Roba Valley, the British gunners did everything right. They held their fire until the Tigers were well within range. They targeted the weaker side armor. They fired with a discipline born of countless drills, and it made no difference. The official reports of the engagement are written in the cold, detached language of military bureaucracy. They speak of engaging hostile armor and expending ammunition to no effect. But they cannot truly convey the horror of that moment. Imagine the scene. The deafening roar of the 6-pounders, the acrid smell of cordite, the desperate hope in the hearts of the gun crews as they watched their shells speed towards their target. And then, the sickening metallic clang as the shell strikes the Tiger's armor and is swatted aside as if by an invisible hand. The Tiger doesn't even seem to notice. It just keeps coming, its long 88mm gun traversing, seeking a target. And then, a flash, a roar, and another British gun position is vaporized, its crew turned to metal confetti. The psychological impact was immediate and devastating. A new word entered the lexicon of the Allied soldier: Tiger phobia. It was a rational and entirely justified fear. After another engagement, a captured British officer was brought before the commander of the 501st Heavy Panzer Battalion. He was asked what he thought of the new German tank. His reply was stark: "I have never seen a tank like it. Our shells just bounced off." The legend of the Tiger was being written in the blood and twisted steel of Allied equipment. But something strange was happening. Even as the legend of the Tiger began to grow, as tales of its invincibility spread like wildfire through the Allied ranks, a different story was beginning to emerge. The Tiger, for all its power, was not invincible. It was a finely tuned, over-engineered machine, and the harsh conditions of the desert were taking their toll. Its Maybach V12 engine, a marvel of engineering, was also thirsty and prone to overheating and catching fire. Its complex transmission, with its 8 forward gears, was prone to breaking down if not handled with exquisite care. The interleaved road wheels, which gave the Tiger its smooth ride and stable gun platform, were a maintenance crew's nightmare. A single damaged inner road wheel could require the removal of several outer wheels, a back-breaking job that could take hours in the field. It was a gas guzzler of epic proportions, a thirsty beast in a land where fuel was more precious than water. More Tigers, it was said, were lost to mechanical failure and a lack of fuel than to enemy action in those early months. This was the paradox of the Tiger. It was a technological masterpiece that was also a logistical liability, a weapon of immense power that was also incredibly fragile. The problem for the Allies was that these mechanical gremlins were little comfort to the men who had to face the Tiger in battle. A broken-down Tiger was still a formidable pillbox, its 88mm gun capable of dominating a battlefield from a static position, and for every Tiger that was abandoned by its crew, there were more that were not. What the Allies needed was not just luck, but a solution. They needed a weapon that could kill the Tiger, and they needed it now. The problem was clear. The 6-pounder was not up to the job. The American 75mm gun on the Sherman tank was even worse. The solution was already in development, but it was a long way from the battlefield. The Ordnance quick-firing 17-pounder was a gun of immense power, a true Tiger killer. But it was a large, heavy weapon, and the carriage designed for it was not yet ready for mass production.
Then it got worse. In February 1943, at the Battle of Kasserine Pass, the Tigers spearheaded an attack that shattered the inexperienced American forces, inflicting a humiliating defeat. The Tigers of the 501st, working in concert with Panzer IVs, tore through the American lines. They destroyed dozens of M3 Stuart light tanks and M4 Shermans, often from ranges where the American tanks were completely helpless to respond. The psychological impact of Kasserine was immense. The Tiger panic that had begun in the British ranks now spread to the Americans. Every German tank was now a Tiger. Every long-barreled gun was an 88. The legend of the invincible German supertank was becoming a self-fulfilling prophecy. The fear of the Tiger was becoming as dangerous as the Tiger itself. But even in the midst of the chaos and despair of Kasserine, a crucial piece of the puzzle fell into Allied hands. On April 21, 1943, near a place called Jebel Jaffa, a Churchill tank of the 48th Royal Tank Regiment, part of the 21st Tank Brigade, was engaged in a fierce firefight. Churchills were infantry tanks, slow and heavily armored, but their 6-pounder guns were no more effective against a Tiger's front than the towed version. A shell from a Tiger ripped through the Churchill's frontal armor, killing the driver and setting the tank ablaze. The rest of the crew bailed out, lucky to be alive. The next day, when a recovery team ventured out to examine the burnt-out tank, they found the Tiger that had killed them. It was sitting silently, abandoned. A lucky, glancing shot from another Churchill had not penetrated its armor, but had struck the turret ring, jamming the traverse mechanism. The crew, unable to fight, had been forced to abandon their prized machine. This was Tiger 131, the first intact Tiger to be captured by the Western Allies. The capture of Tiger 131 was a turning point. It was a prize of incalculable value. The tank was immediately swarmed by intelligence officers and engineers. They treated it not as a captured weapon, but as a priceless artifact from an alien civilization. It was meticulously documented, photographed, and then carefully prepared for a long journey. The race was on to get the tank off the battlefield before the Germans could destroy it to protect its secrets. It was shipped to Tunis, where it was displayed for King George VI and Winston Churchill, a tangible symbol of a vulnerability in the beast they so feared. From there, it was sent to England for a thorough and complete dissection. At the School of Tank Technology, engineers and scientists spent months taking Tiger 131 apart piece by piece. They analyzed its armor, discovering the high quality of the steel plate and the excellence of the welds. They marveled at the precision of the Zeiss gun sight, which was far superior to anything the Allies had. They studied the engine, the transmission, the layout of the crew compartment. They discovered its weaknesses: the slow turret traverse, the ergonomic flaws, the maintenance-heavy design. The real revelation, however, came from this detailed analysis combined with the hard-won experience of the men who had faced it. The Tiger was not a breakthrough tank. It was a defensive weapon. It was designed to sit back and kill from a distance, using its superior gun and armor to its advantage. It was a bully, a sniper, not a brawler. In a close-quarters fight, its slow speed and sluggish turret made it vulnerable. This was the key. The Allies realized that they didn't need to build a tank that could go toe-to-toe with the Tiger in a slugging match. They just needed a gun that could kill it. And that gun was the 17-pounder. The problem was, the 17-pounder was still a towed anti-tank gun. What they needed was a tank that could carry it. The British tank industry, for all its efforts, could not produce a tank with a turret ring wide enough to accommodate the massive gun in time for the planned invasion of Europe. The Cromwell was too small. The new Challenger tank was beset by development problems. The solution came from a most unlikely place: the American M4 Sherman. The Sherman was a good tank, reliable, easy to maintain, and produced in vast numbers. It was the workhorse of the Allied armies, but its 75mm gun was no match for the Tiger's frontal armor. British officers, facing the reality of the Tiger threat, began a desperate project to mount the 17-pounder in the Sherman's turret. It was a project born of necessity, an act of battlefield improvisation on a strategic scale. It was tight-fit, so tight that the gun's breech had to be rotated 90 degrees to allow the loader to ram around home. A new mantlet had to be designed. The recoil system had to be heavily modified. The radio had to be moved to a box welded onto the back of the turret. Ammunition storage was a major problem, but it worked. The result was the Sherman Firefly. It was a hybrid of American mass production and British ingenuity, a compromise, a lash-up, as some of its critics called it. The Firefly was not a perfect tank. It was still a Sherman with its tall profile and relatively thin armor. It was cramped, and the massive muzzle blast from the 17-pounder kicked up so much dust and smoke that the gunner often had trouble seeing if his first shot had hit. But it had the one thing that mattered: a gun that could kill a Tiger. The proof of this new solution would come on the battlefields of Normandy.
The Germans, when they first encountered the Firefly in the summer of 1944, were dismissive. They saw just another Sherman, an easy kill. They would soon learn their mistake. In the close-quarters fighting of the Normandy bocage, the dense hedgerow country was a nightmare for tank warfare. The long-range advantages of the Tiger were nullified. Here, battles were often decided at ranges of a few hundred yards. This was the Firefly's ideal hunting ground. It would lie in wait, its long gun hidden in the hedgerows, and then, at the opportune moment, it would strike, its armor-piercing ballistic capped shell ripping through the Tiger's thick armor. The mathematics of destruction had begun to shift. The avalanche of steel was no longer flowing in one direction. The German tank crews quickly learned to identify and fear the Firefly. They began to target the long-barreled Shermans first in any engagement. This led to a desperate cat-and-mouse game. British Firefly crews would try to camouflage their guns, painting the last few feet of the barrel white on the underside to create the illusion of a shorter 75mm gun. Some would even attach a dummy muzzle brake halfway down the barrel. It was a testament to the fear the Firefly now instilled in the hunters who had become the hunted. The climax of this technological arms race, the moment that truly signified the turning of the tide, came on August 8, 1944, during Operation Totalize.
the German tank ace Michael Wittmann, a man who had become a national hero in Germany for destroying over 100 Allied tanks, was killed in his Tiger near the town of Saint-Aignan-de-Cramsnil. For decades, the exact circumstances of his death were a mystery, but recent analysis of accounts from both sides has made it almost certain that Wittmann's Tiger was ambushed by a Sherman Firefly from the Northamptonshire Yeomanry. The Firefly's 17-pounder shell tore through the Tiger's thin rear engine deck armor, igniting the stored ammunition. The resulting explosion was so violent it blew the Tiger's massive turret clean off its hull. The death of Wittmann, a hero of the Reich, was a devastating blow to German morale. The invincible Tiger had been slain by the humble Sherman. The myth was broken. The overwhelming evidence of this shift in power can be seen in the numbers. In total, only around 1,347 Tiger I tanks were ever produced. By contrast, the Allies produced over 50,000 Shermans, with over 2,000 of them being converted to the Firefly standard. The Tiger was a masterpiece of engineering, but it was a bespoke weapon, a handcrafted sledgehammer in a war that was being won by the mass-produced wrench. It took an immense amount of resources and skilled labor to produce a single Tiger. The Germans, in their pursuit of the perfect weapon, had forgotten the first rule of modern warfare: quantity has a quality all its own. The Tiger was a brilliant tactical weapon, but a strategic failure. It could win battles, but it could not win the war. The legacy of the Tiger shock was profound. It forced the Allies to rapidly accelerate their own tank development. The British, learning the lessons of the Firefly, went on to produce the Centurion, arguably the world's first true main battle tank, a direct response to the challenge of the German Big Cats. The Americans, for their part, finally expedited the deployment of the M26 Pershing, a heavy tank designed to take on the Tiger and its even more powerful successor, the King Tiger. The Tiger, in a strange way, had made the Allies stronger. It had shattered their complacency and forced them to innovate, to adapt, to overcome. It had taught them a brutal but valuable lesson. In the crucible of war, it is not the strongest who survive, but those most adaptable to change. The story of the first encounter with the Tiger tank is more than just a tale of steel and fire. It is a story about the human spirit, about the ability of ordinary men to face their deepest fears, to stare into the face of a seemingly invincible machine and not break. It is a testament to the ingenuity and designers who worked tirelessly in factories and workshops far from the front lines to give those men a fighting chance. And it is a reminder that even the most terrifying of monsters can be slain, that no weapon is truly invincible, and that in the end, it is not the machine that wins the war, but the courage and resilience of the men who fight it. The clang of shells bouncing harmlessly off its hide in that Tunisian valley echoed through the remainder of the war, a sound of terror that was eventually answered by the roar of guns that could finally kill the beast.